Hello, I'm Teresa Arrowwood, and as promised, I'm supplying the second part of Stealing the Thunder. Hope you enjoy it. Sorry, everyone. I'm not a big fan of being in front of the camera, but we're going to start Stealing the Thunder, Chapter 1, Part 2. You're lucky she didn't recognize you, Landon huffed. I made sure to cover my tracks. Carter, you could jeopardize the whole mission. I can't leave my wife. Can't you see how fragile she is? If you're not careful, the next one will be for real. Landon looked at Carter with great distress. You could potentially risk her life, your baby's, and your own. Carter never uttered a word, nor did he move an inch. You've never been careless before. It's never involved my wife and children before. His voice was low and harsh, his tone agitated. Look at her, Landon. She hasn't slept or eaten for the last few days. I promise you I will take care of her. The quicker we get Arnell Andrews behind bars, the better off we will all be. Until then, you will follow orders. How's Beth? She hasn't spoken since she was told. Without further prompting, Landon continued. Your mother is a mess. Your father hasn't had a chance to fall apart. Molly cries herself to sleep. She doesn't understand. And Isabella, I can't do anything with. She sits in the bedroom with your picture and a shirt. Carter grinned, as it had brought back some good memories. The shirt has a little history to it. Well, Grayson and her parents are trying, but nothing seems to help her. Carter took a deep breath. I knew this would never work. My wife runs the risk, after all she's been through, of losing our baby. She doesn't need the added stress. It isn't worth putting my family through all of this. You stay put. I have enough with them and JC without having to worry about you following orders. JC? He's a basket case. He thinks it's his fault. He's threatened to leave the force. You promised me this. Carter's jaw clenched. If Bella has problems with the baby, I want you to pull the plug on this. You know I don't have the authority to do that. I don't care if Brooks likes it or not. Get me out. I won't let her go through it alone. Fine, I'll take care of it. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Bella wouldn't be happy if she knew you hadn't. I'll keep in touch. Just dismiss me, they're watching. Landon stood stiffly and saluted, dismissing him. Upon reaching home, I retreated to the bedroom as the mourners gathered. I wanted nothing to do with company of any kind. Being tired and emotionally spent wasn't all that affected me. My soul ached for him. I lay quietly, running my hand over the space where he would have lain. His cologne still remained on the pillow and on the shirt he had offered to me months before. I gripped them to my chest and cried, but there were barely any tears left to cry. My eyes were red and sore, and my body ached from lack of sleep. I felt limp and lifeless. I could remember flashes of him, his smile and his laugh. Isabella, you certainly know how to unravel a man. I had heard his voice echo in the room. My grief consumed me as I lay thinking of him. I could still feel his hands on my body and the warmth of his embrace. This was unreal. It just couldn't be possible. We were celebrating the future arrival of our child. In the short time he knew, he had planned the nursery down to the last nail. Now he wouldn't be there to see his child. How cruel was that for a child to never know his father? Curling into a tight ball, I grabbed my knees, my mind and heart ravaged with pain as I began to pray. My words barely formed. Please, it hurts. Please make it stop. Please, help me. My voice whispered. Isabella, can I come in? The baritone voice of Grayson was unmistakable. I lay still, not answering him. He continued in and turned on the desk lamp where Carter had written reports and bills at times. His personal belongings remained in a bag that were never opened. His wallet, watch, firearm, and shoes were untouched from the time they had been brought home. Listening to his footsteps against the wood floor, the distance closed between us. My back remained turned to him as he sat on the edge of the bed. I know you're awake. Do you want to talk? I shook my head and he continued to sit there. I know you miss him and that you're hurting. Nothing can compare to what you must be feeling. I wanted to thank you for the joy you gave him. He waited a long time for you. He had told me once after Andrea had passed that when God wanted him to have someone new in his life, he would present them to him. He called me the night of your first date. I couldn't believe how thrilled my grown son was about going out with you. He told me about how he had planned to have a horse-drawn carriage to take you both for a drive along the coast. You would have thought it was Christmas morning, and he was 5 years old. He laughed. He even called and told me when he was going to propose. He wanted us there, all of us. In October, he came home and had his mother go ring shopping with him. Iris came home crying and laughing at the same time, telling me, "He loves her, Grayson. He loves her." I really thought her reaction had topped it all until Carter called and told us about the baby. My boy was on cloud 9. He wanted so much to have a child with you. I don't think I have ever heard him so happy. My bottom lip quivered as the tears gently fell against my cheeks. Turning, I sat up in the bed and looked at Grayson. He was trying to hide the pain, but it had shown all over his face. I loved him, Pop. I know you did, honey. Reaching for me, I clung to him, sobbing. In the length of time I had known Carter's dad, I had for the first time saw the love and compassion he had for his son. Gently he patted my back in an attempt to comfort me. He loved you and these babies. My heart burned and ached, my throat was sore, and I wondered if I were going to be able to take my next breath. Grayson had taught his son such loving gestures. He sat and cradled me like I were a child, allowing me to cry. His cheek rested against my face, wet from his own tears. We'll make it, honey. Together. We'll make it. Later that evening, after everyone had left, my parents and Carter's remained. I had left the bedroom only briefly to check on Molly and found her curled up in my father's lap, holding on to a book. She lay in a restless sleep as my father rocked her. If it were as easy with you, he sighed. I'm here for you too, you know. I squeezed his shoulder and bent to kiss him on the cheek. My parents and Grayson sat in the living room trying to make sense of all of it. Iris went to bed. The doctor had given Grayson tranquilizers for her, which now she needed to survive this nightmare. I myself was now living in a bottle. I rarely had taken anything over the past month, but now I needed something. I wasn't sure if it were safe to take what I had since I had found out I was pregnant. I was going to have to tough it out. I couldn't take a chance on something happening to his child. The night was long as I lay there next to the empty spot where he had once lain beside me. Our room felt cold, along with our bed. After lying there for 3 hours, unable to sleep, I walked into the bath and turned on the water to the garden tub. Pouring lavender oil into the bath, I was hoping it would relax me enough so that I would finally be able to sleep. Stepping into the bath, I sunk into the water, closing my eyes, taking in the aroma of the oils mixed with the steam and water. I thought of the time I went to the station to tell him that I was pregnant. He had gone into a spiel about going to see the precinct's physician, the physician running tests and finding nothing. He looked at me, and I had wondered if he were angry with me. I knew then that he knew about the baby. Sitting there petrified, he had asked me, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" It had brought a laugh and a crying jag as I had remembered his grin when he found he was going to be a father again. We had talked about the nursery and what we were going to do with it, where it would be, and when we would buy the crib. We had decided not to buy the crib until a month before the birth. Not because we didn't want to be ready, but because he knew that it was possible there could be problems, and he didn't want me to have to look at it if something had happened. He had teased me about some baby names, and some were really out there. I knew one thing for sure. If it were a boy, he would bear his father's name in any form. Carter or Elijah, one of them would be his name. A daughter was another story. I had no idea. It was early, and it wasn't a good time to name a child until you knew if you were going to be able to carry it. I was going to do all that I could to ensure that this child would be born healthy. I couldn't stand the thought of losing someone else I loved. I had sat in the water so long that my hands and fingers had puckered. Taking the towel from the rack, I stood before the mirror and looked at my body. It didn't appear to be any different than before, but there was a child in there. Carter's child. After drying off, I took his shirt and put it on, leaving the last few buttons unfastened enough to view my belly. Rubbing it slowly, I spoke to my unborn child. "Well, look at you. Your daddy would have been so happy if he had been here. He loves you. Do you know that? He wanted so much to hold you and to kiss your little face. When I told him about you, he was so happy. He started planning a room and talked about how he was going to take you to ball games and fishing. It didn't matter if you were going to be a boy or a girl. He would have done the same." Tears fell, and I pushed him back with the back of my hand. "I love you too. Mommy loves you so much. You hang in there, okay? Things are going to get better for us. I promise. You have Pop, Nan, Grandpa, and Mem to love you. Uncle Landon and Beth will be there for you too. We'll be fine." Trying to reassure myself wasn't helping much, but I had to try to get myself together. I had children to think of. Weeks had passed, and I was no better off than I had been from the time that he had been killed. The only difference was that the days and nights had both gotten longer and more unbearable. Grayson and Iris had wanted me to shut the house up and move in with them until at least the birth of the baby. But I couldn't stand the thought of leaving when this is where we had lived. This is where Carter was for me. The only other place that had existed was the cabin in Tennessee, where we had spent a weekend together. My mind would not let go of the fact that he was gone. I had reminders of him everywhere. Pictures of us together while we were in Tennessee, our wedding day, and others of just Carter and Molly together were scattered about our home. I'd been in the desk recently and found pictures of Andrea and Carter together. He had them wrapped in a stack of old cards and letters that had been carefully preserved. The last thing I had found was an envelope addressed to Molly. I had assumed it was from her mother. It remained sealed, and I never bothered to open it. I had started back to work. Most days I walked around in a stupor, more of a robot than a person. The only saving grace to it was it did keep my mind occupied while I was there. It had been a month since Carter had died, and no one mentioned a word about it. Well, except for Marilyn, who always seemed to draw her fingers down the chalkboard. I had thought of a couple things in the time period that had passed. My life needed to change. I needed to do something to make his death less meaningless. I had spoken with Gus a couple of times, and he had talked over a couple of things with me. He had advised me not to make a snap decision based on what had happened, and I took it to heart. I had still frequented the academy for self-defense and the firing range. It had made perfectly good sense to me, but then I needed a little more time to think a few things through. After one of the first days I had put in, I walked into the house followed by Pierce. Quentin had become a fixture. He followed me everywhere. He was my age or thereabouts anyway, with a slim build, and was fairly good looking. You would think he would have some kind of social life outside his job. He was average height and solid as a rock, with a no-nonsense personality. He wore his copper-colored hair in a military cut and had dark brown eyes. He kept his distance with me, which was fine. It's the way I had wanted it. When he had seen Landon there with Molly and Beth, he turned to say goodbye and saw himself out. He was a man of few words, and I liked that. The more time to be alone, the better. It gave me the time I needed to reflect on things. Beth had shortly made her leave, and it left me with both sets of parents and Landon. For some reason, they felt they needed to stay with me. Each night, I would read to Molly and tuck her in as usual, kissing her good night. Tonight had been no different. I was so tired I needed to get to bed, and I had said good night to both sets of parents, and they had made their way to other bedrooms. Landon had gone on to lie down on the couch as I walked into the bedroom. It had reminded me of the first night I stayed with Carter, bringing back those raw emotions of loss once more. All I had were memories, and I had to get used to it. Lying down, I reached across the bed to where Carter had once been and turned off the light. It wasn't going to take long to go to sleep. Regardless of the emotional roller coaster I was on, my body was not going to allow me to be awake for long. This would be one of the few times I wouldn't be crying myself to sleep. "Get him out of the way before he gets us killed," the voice shouted. Carter stood in the door jamb, hunkered down almost to the floor with rapid fire around him. "Radio for some help or we're all going to die." Running feet scurried away, and a voice called over the radio for assistance at a makeshift warehouse in the downtown area. A shot was fired, and Carter had jumped back against the frame. Reloading, he hadn't stood a chance from the shooter. As he had kicked the magazine, the shot pierced his chest and a second to the side of his face. "Isabella, run!" he had screamed. "Carter!" I screamed, sitting straight up in the bed, panting like I had been in a race. I could still see his face and the blood running down his body even after I had awakened. I clutched his pillow to my chest, trying to regain some control of my breathing, which had become erratic and strained. My hair was wet, my clothes felt damp. And Landon burst into the door, followed by both sets of parents. And that's where we'll end for this evening. I hope you enjoy this. I'll be back with part 3 of chapter 1. Good evening.